All right, you guys, I am back here with Dr. Allan Bacon. Hello.
Hey, how are you doing? Thanks for having me on, Pam.
Good. I'm so happy you could come on. It was kind of I guess we scheduled this interview or talk a while back, and then you kind of did a whole podcast, a bunch of podcasts, right?
I did,
The
yeah.
original
I
one?
actually had a podcast tour in Los Angeles, and so
Yes.
I unfortunately had to put this one a little bit, farther out just because of,
Mhm.
of traveling and all that. But it
Yeah.
was definitely one that I wanted to get on. I mean, you always put out really good information, and I think that the topics that you wanted to talk about today look like they would be great to really help people out, especially during a holiday period.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and this was perfect for, like I talked about right before we got on. Well, you guys, we talked for about 15-20 minutes about dogs. So we won't talk about that on here, but both of us love dogs. But it will be great for the holiday season. And as everybody, like you said, is going to be kind of reassessing their fitness and, what kind of direction they want to go in 2025. So I wanted to talk about really quick, like, who is Dr. Allan Bacon for those that don't know? Kind of what's your fitness background and why are you here? What's your mission?
So I took a circuitous route to get into fitness. I have a doctorate in dental surgery that I earned, and then I practiced for 10 years.
Wow.
And I had always been into fitness. I'd always been into nutrition. I had been formulating for dietary supplement companies, the sports supplements, for a long time, and training friends and family. I mean, I've been big into the gym since 1995 or so, and uh, and
So like
so I
since
had
you were 5?
Yeah, I'm actually a little bit older than I look, I think, and I think that's a good thing that you said that. It was one of those things that this was always a passion of mine to begin with, and I was just in a different career path. And my I ended up having some things happen with life. My father ended up getting esophageal cancer that ended up eventually taking his life, and he was a dentist and he had practiced for 35 years. And towards the end there, I was speaking to him and I said, what would you have done differently if you could have done things over again?
Mhm.
And he responded and he said two things. He said, I wish I would have spent more time with friends and family and doing things that I really enjoyed, because he was a workaholic. I mean, he would work, sun up till sundown. We had maybe 7 days a year that he had off because he was the
Wow.
sole practitioner in his practice. And so he wanted to spend more time with friends, family, doing things that he was really passionate about. The other thing that he said was he wished that he would have taken more time to take care of his own health.
Mm.
And that struck a chord with me because I felt like I had the knowledge to be able to really help people with these types of things. I mean, my rote background wasn't necessarily in fitness and nutrition, but there was certainly a very large amount of, anatomy and physiology, microbiome, all those different types of things to be able to understand the human body and understand to have the ability to be able to understand and read research. And so it was something that I was doing anyway because it was a passion project of mine. And I turned to my wife, and she was somebody that was really big into fitness as well. And she was a regionals qualified CrossFit competitor. She went to Worlds in 2019 for Olympic weightlifting and had an American record in snatch and placed second in the
Awesome.
world in her class. And and so I was like, why don't we start coaching on the side? And she said, yeah, let's go for it. So we founded Maui Athletics, our coaching company. Did it online from the very start, which was a really good thing for us. Is that we came in, before COVID, had all of our different things going on with the way that we had our program set up. So we didn't really miss a beat during that time period where people had to adjust. But for 2 years, I continued practicing in medicine and coaching at the same time, both full time. And then the business took off enough to be able to sustain quality of life, and I switched over full time after 2 years, and I've been doing that ever since. So, it was one of those things that it took a big life event to really spur getting into this, but it has ended up being a really good thing because it allows me to help people not fall into the same situation that my father did. And I'm not saying that, you know, um, fitness and nutrition can completely repair or prevent cancer, but the reality is we have a genetic predisposition to potentially getting cancer.
Sure.
If we take care of ourselves more, not only do we have a much greater chance of avoiding it. But even if we do end up getting it, we've got a much greater chance of surviving it. And so
Yeah.
seeing what that type of thing does to people really made me want to get into this, because I can help people not only reach their physique goals, but maybe even prevent them from having health problems later in life that they never would know, would have been possible.
Yeah.
And that kind of keeps me going when people are talking about, hey, I want to really improve my health. Let's, show me a path to be able to get there. And I really feel like I'm making a big difference by doing what I do these days.
Yeah. So when you say people come to you and say, I want to, get on a path for better health, do you find that people are coming to you for like, I want to be healthier? Or do you see more people coming to you like, I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to, I want this physique.
Most of the time you want to look better in bed. But
Okay.
that's okay, and there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that. And I always tell people, this is not something to be shameful to say. Health is
Mhm.
usually in the back of people's minds, but health never takes a priority until you don't have it.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so that's a real problem with the way that we look at things, and that's always something that I talk about all the time with my clients. Um,
Yeah.
and so when they request certain things, we always have those talks about, okay, well, what are the pros and cons here?
Hmm.
Can we change our mindset or shift our mindset
Hmm.
if we're trying to do something that might be counter to our health goals, even if it might seem like a good idea for our physique goals in the short term? And then we have that conversation and we make the right choice for that person. But as an example, people will always get stuck on that. I need to see the scale drop. But
Yes.
then they'll have goals of adding lean muscle, which are
Hmm.
counter to each other. I mean, we understand what you say when you say you want to see the scale drop. You want to lose fat,
Yes.
but you may lose fat and be heavier if over time
Hmm.
you're gaining lean muscle, and that's just the way that it is. So, starting to really get people focused on what matters, focusing on true signs of progress, getting out those old preconceptions that we had is a
Hmm.
very, very beneficial thing, particularly when you have a coach that's looking at your health long term. I think
Yeah.
that the really bad coaches are the ones that just give in to clients and they say, okay, we'll do whatever it takes to just see the scale drop.
Yeah.
Really good coaches will have that conversation with people and discuss the pros and cons, discuss getting them to shift their mindset to what's really productive that will keep them going long term and what will promote that health that they're looking for at the same time, even though that might not be the priority right now. There's no problem with getting into better shape and looking better naked, but
Yeah.
let's do it in a sustainable way that's going to promote health and keep you with a higher quality of life throughout the decades, rather than something that's going to hamstring you later just to see the scale drop right now.
Right. I think we both know, being in the industry, the space for so long. Most people, I mean, I guess including myself, probably you at some level, we start out with an aesthetic goal and then it kind of morphs into this health goal oftentimes. And I think that's kind of how I see a lot of my clients as well. And I think as I get older in the space, um, I like kind of had that same kind of conversation with people like, okay, what's your actual goal? How can we turn this into something healthy? Because anybody can help you lose weight.
Just stop
That's the
eating.
easy part. Yeah, that's the
There's a
easy part.
very clear, easy path to losing weight.
Mhm.
Just stop eating, start fasting.
Yeah.
But having said, we're going to get into fasting in a little bit,
Mhm.
probably. But
Yeah, sure. We
but
can talk about that.
these types of things, when you're trying to just see the scale move, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get you where you want to be either. Because
Right.
when people say that they want to have the toned or athletic look, that assumes that there is a level of lean muscle there. And if your
Yeah.
only path to get there is to fast or to just stop eating, you're never going to get where you want to be. Because what
Hmm.
you're going to end up doing is you're going to have that 1980s crack model booty and not the peach booty that you're going for.
Yeah.
And
The
so
back
we
with
have
a
this,
crack in it. That's what we
yeah,
call that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's this big problem that I've noticed that we have these days.
Hmm.
We want to have a different body style, which is great. I mean, both men and women these days are valuing being more fit looking than they did in the past. I mean, and I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and in the 80s and 90s, it was all about just being thin. It wasn't
Hmm.
about having a healthy, athletic physique. These
Yeah.
days, things have shifted, and that's wonderful. And I think that it's shifted for most age groups. I mean, even
Hmm.
people that are my age and older, I think they look at athletic physiques and they're like, okay, I really like those.
Yeah.
But the issue that I'm seeing across the board is that, and this is particularly in women of my age and older, and that's not to
Mhm.
be sexist, but hear me out and you can give me your input on this.
Yeah.
I think that the issue with people that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and older is that we grew up in a time period where it was drilled into us to restrict, 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 cardio, cardio, cardio to
Mhm.
get the body that we want.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is that is when we were going for an old aesthetic of just being skinny and potentially malnourished looking.
Yeah.
I mean, the Kate Moss look is what you're going for when you fast for extended periods of time and when all you do is cardio.
Mhm.
So that's not the look that we're going for anymore. But in our mind, in society's mind, that's how you get into shape.
Yeah.
And so the issue that we have, and the reason that I bring it up with women is because women were inundated with this more than men back in that
Mhm.
time period. It was always like, stop eating, stop eating. You know, you want to look like that cheerleader that you saw on TV or whatever it was. And I don't blame women for feeling this way. I think that this is a lamentable situation. I think that we were essentially abused into thinking that this is the way that it should happen.
Yeah.
And so, particularly for people that went through that, I think it's very difficult mentally and emotionally to make that mental shift of, okay, maybe I need to spend a year or 2 or 3 building lean muscle first
Mhm.
before I'm able to get where I want to go. And maybe that comes with gaining weight on the scale.
Yeah.
I bring it up in the way that I do because it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. It's one that I think that if we sit back and we think about it, it's like, okay, maybe that is happening. Maybe I do think about it that way because of what I was told as a child, because of what I experienced when I was growing up, and
Yeah.
because there were different beauty standards back then.
Mhm.
And now that I have a different goal than what I had back then, I might still be stuck on that old mindset that's not going to get me to this new goal. And so when you start to realize that maybe you've experienced this and maybe in your subconscious you're looking at it in this old viewpoint, it can be easier to start to change that mindset and accept that maybe there's a different path that's needed to go to get where I want to be because it's a different goal than what I used to have.
Yeah. I actually love that. That's a sound bite.
So,
Because,
well, it's a
um,
difficult conversation to broach because
no,
especially with, coming
I
out of a
love it.
man's mouth, it sounds sexist at first until you really get into it and you're like, okay, maybe that has happened.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think, like you said, 30 and over. I was taking notes as you were chatting. The 30 and over, obviously, I deal with primarily women, and I have, I remember I was the weirdo as a teen, really kind of interested in bodybuilding at 13 and 14, but that was odd then.
That was an
um,
exception rather than the rule. I mean, have you noticed with your clients that exactly what we're talking about here, doing
mhm.
a shift towards valuing building some lean muscle is a conversation that you occasionally have to have.
Yeah, and so, but I'm thinking back when I was that age, I still have pictures of my bedroom at the time, and I had Cindy Crawford on my wall,
Right.
and so those were the standards. But I also had, Rachel McLeish, and then eventually, Marla Duncan. Those are like the fitness girls back in the day. If anybody knows those names, I'm aging myself, but you had to search those bodies out
Yeah,
and
you had good examples.
yes, but I remember just still being surrounded with, like you said, the Kate Moss. For me, I think early on, I just loved the empowerment of feeling strong,
Yeah.
and I didn't mind that people thought I had muscle. I thought it felt cool to be strong, but also I know that wasn't the normal. So I'm thinking back of the standards. I knew my body would never be Kate Moss, but I do remember very vividly thinking maybe I should be thinner and people would accept me better.
See, and this is
Um,
this is the type of thing that I always want to talk out against because I feel really bad. Men don't have to go through this quite as much. If men went through this as much, I would be talking about that too. I feel really bad for women because women face a lot of challenges that men don't. And
yeah,
even if a woman today, it's much better today. But
yeah,
even if a woman today is like, you know what, I want to have that athletic physique. There's a lot of
mhm,
ignorant men in my age group and older that
mhm,
will, the second you have any sort of muscle tone, will make
yeah,
a mannish comment.
yeah,
And that is not that's
mhm,
the worst message that can be sent. It's ignorance. It is probably a sign that that man has security issues.
yeah,
And if we want to empower women and we want women to be as healthy as possible, I'm not
Hmm.
saying that we push the standard of women need to be as big as people that are on steroids, but
Sure.
building lean muscle to have a greater quality of life is a necessity. Valuing
Hmm.
these women and supporting them in what they're trying to do is a necessity. And even if you look at literally all of the research, it supports this. I mean, muscle
Yeah.
mass index is one of the greatest indicators of health and longevity that there is. It is much more relevant than body mass index. Now, I'm not downplaying body mass index because it has a value for a general screening tool.
Hmm.
But if we start to shift our attention to the fact that, hey, lean muscle has a very real benefit to quality of life and longevity, and that it's scientifically proven that this is true, then maybe
Yeah.
we can start valuing it more. And then on top of that, realizing the issues that we run into as we age. In your 40s, we start to lose lean muscle. We lose about um, 0.5% every year in our 40s, and it ramps up to 1 to 2% in our 50s, and then it reaches a staggering 3% in our 60s onward.
Wow.
Every
Yeah.
year you lose 3% of your muscle mass. And
That's
that's why
incredible.
we have these issues with sarcopenia. I mean, in some populations, it's as high as 60%,
Yeah.
that the risk for sarcopenia. That's in assisted care facilities. It's very, very bad.
Yeah.
And if we started to realize, hey, if we take both young men and young women, because young men's muscle mass is going down,
Hmm.
in the past 20 and 30 years, if we start to make physical fitness and healthy nutrition a better focus from a young age onward, if we stop giving both men and women, but particularly women, crap for taking care of themselves,
Yeah.
um, maybe we'll see much better health outcomes. Maybe we'll stress the healthcare system less. Maybe people will have better quality of life. Maybe
Yeah.
they will become the examples that their kids need.
And like
Yeah.
you said, if something does happen, you're more likely to bounce back because of
Oh,
that
100%. Yeah.
muscle. So I wanted to circle back real quick to the 30, 40, 50 and over. With women, I was a one-off. I do get that, but I still felt that kind of sided pressure to be normal in the eyes of everybody else. So I became very, secluded and, very introverted with a lot of things because I didn't want to go that path. And I'm obviously very glad that I stuck to what I felt. But there was still that isolating factor of
Sure.
of of not being normal, or wanting that. But I will say that women that I work with that are 40s, 50s, 60s, even, I still see that voice in their head often. And it's so many times over and over, me having to reassure them they're doing the right thing, reassure them that food is fuel and it's messaging it to our body, and that muscle is so vitally important to our health span. But I still see them fight and struggle with that constantly, of them still, like you said, they were just instilled so much, um, as young women, to not value the muscle and almost feel ashamed to eat more, to want muscle. And it's oftentimes me talking women off the ledge. If I have them, doing X, Y, and Z workouts, and we're proud of their results, and they're saying things like, oh, I can get out of my car without pulling myself up, I can, all of these really cool non-scale victories, they still, at a tired moment, a weak moment in their mind, or maybe stressful, they'll go back to that scale and rethink everything that we're doing, because they still feel the pressure to be a smaller version on the scale.
And
And
subconsciously, they're thinking that,
yes,
how's the way to get there?
yes, and they
Stop eating and do
will.
cardio.
Yep, and they will say, "Well, maybe I'm working out hard. Maybe I just feel like my legs are getting too big," or, things like that. And I'm very sensitive to all of it. And of course, I want to hug them and say, it's okay to break what you felt. But and we can jump right to this, because this was a question I wanted to ask you anyway. You talk a lot about, no, so you're very well educated, very well spoken, researched, and that's one reason why I love following you and following your information. Um, because it's trustworthy and you're not just giving opinions about everything. You talk a lot about mindset. And I feel like that's such a missing link because, again, we all know how to lose weight. In fact, most of us can probably Google how to build muscle. But it's the mindset factor. So how do we switch that mindset over time, long term? If you have that kind of answer, you have those conversations, and like, what does Dr. Allen do for that for your clients? How do you switch that? How do you change that in somebody that's so built into their core?
So when you're going on a fitness journey, you're going to want to there's different stages that you're going to want to set out to be able to get into the proper mindset, and obviously there's a bunch of different facets of where mindset's going to go. But the way that I always talk about it with people is the first thing that you want to do is establish your why. And this is something
Mhm.
that I'm sure that you've heard of before, but the
Yep.
reason that we talk about it is because this is the basis for everything.
Mhm.
And so we had started hinting at this earlier, why are you doing this? And the answer is never, I want to see the scale go lower, because that for most people just doesn't matter. Now, people use that as a sign of success, but that's not why you're doing it. You don't feel great about yourself because the scale says 115 pounds if you don't feel like you look the way that you should look at that 115 pounds.
Yeah.
The scale weight choice is arbitrary. You are really saying, I want to lose body fat, or I want to gain confidence, or I want to look more toned, or whatever it is. But why do you want to do that? And I
Yeah.
think that having that conversation with yourself is a really important thing. If the answer is I want to gain more confidence, and that's a really good reason to do it.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of people will say, I just want to feel better about, being with my partner. I want to do this for them, or I want to be healthier. There's a lot of different reasons why this could be, but figure
Yeah.
out the deep down core reason of why and write it down. And there
Mhm.
isn't just one. There's likely multiple. And like we
Mhm.
said, health might be one of them. It's probably lower down on the list unless you've had a health scare.
Yeah.
But figuring out exactly why you want to do this is a really good thing, because you can always bring yourself back to that. And I always say, write this down, because if you have it
Yeah.
written down, you can reference it and it can
Yeah.
remind you when you're having that emotional struggle. Because when you're emotionally struggling, you're not going to be thinking lucidly. But if you write it down when you're thinking lucidly, you can check it out later and it can really bring you back from the brink. Once you've established your why, the biggest conversation that I have with people to foster the right mindset long term is proper goal setting. And this is something that 99.9% of you are shit at. I
Mhm.
have almost never had a client start with me that knows how to set proper goals. And I don't blame people for this, but I want people to realize that this is a problem. And this is why you're on the diet roller coaster every year, because you set
Yeah.
shit goals. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, an unproductive goal is an outcome based goal. I'm 165 pounds. I want to be 145 pounds. That's where I'll be happy. Why? What happens at 145 pounds? Well, that's
Mhm.
what I weighed in college, or that's what I weighed in high school. Okay. Are you exactly the same as you were in high school? Are you not trying to be better than what you were in high school? Like, what's the deal? Why did you pick that number? And you'll usually find out that that's an arbitrary set point. An outcome based goal either has it definitely has something that you can't control in play. It's, you can't control how much weight you lose. You can't control how quickly it happens. And the problem with them is it sets you up for only two basic ultimate end goals. Either you reach that goal that you set, you reach that 145 pounds, and you're exactly where you want to be. And then you no longer have a motivation to keep you moving forward. And we often find that people will flounder then and then regain the weight. And that's one of the reasons we have so much recidivism that we do. I think the numbers are about 90% of people regain a lot of the weight that they lose during a weight loss phase. And a lot of it's because of their goal setting.
Mm.
Or you don't reach that goal and then you feel like a failure. And then you probably regain any weight that you lost anyways, if not more.
And then
And
add some.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, and then add some on top of that. And so
Mhm.
this outcome-based goal setting is extremely negative from a long-term sustainability standpoint. And a lot of times that a coach talks with people about this, you get a lot of kickback. Well, I have to have that goal
Yeah.
to give myself the motivation. This is why you're on the diet roller coaster, because you keep telling yourself that you have to have a goal that you can't control. So I
Mhm.
challenge you to switch this up, because what you're doing doesn't work. And that's why you're listening to a podcast about health and fitness and trying to
Great.
figure out, what you're actually doing. So the reason the solution to this is to switch from an outcome-based goal to a habit or routine-based goal. Habits
Mhm.
and routines are things that you can either completely or largely control. You can't control how much weight you lose on a scale. You cannot control if you gain 30 pounds in your bench press. You can't control if your transformation lasts only 3 months, but you can control largely how much you sleep per night, how adherent and consistent you are with your nutrition, how many times you get into the gym per week, how many steps you get per day, how much water you drink. So choose something that you have a large amount of control over and
Hmm.
set those as your goals. And the physique and performance and health improvements will come if you
Hmm.
have the right plan in place and you're focusing on the right things. If you're reinforcing these habits and routines that will bring you to success, it's only a matter of time that those physique changes that you're looking for will start to happen, that those strength changes that you're looking for will start to happen. But you
Yeah.
have to give yourself the environment that supports those changes. And by
Hmm.
focusing on the goal itself, the outcome itself, you're missing the entire journey and you're not valuing the journey itself.
Yeah.
And so you can use these outcome based goals to get to your goal.
Hmm.
But by ignoring the habit and routine based
Hmm.
goals, the chance of that being sustainable long term is next to nil. And that's one
Yeah.
of the reasons that you're constantly floundering every year. And that's why you have to do that. Every January, I get back on the horse and I try to do this all over again. And then by March, I'm off of it.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
start to value these habit and routine based goals, not only are you going to be focusing on something that you have a large amount of control over, and therefore you can make adjustments when things are challenging and you fall off track a little bit, you've got something that you can change or
Hmm.
focus on. It also reinforces patterns that will maintain your progress long term. So if you're focusing on getting 8 or 10,000 steps or whatever it is that you set as your goal, well, once you go off this program that you've had with a coach or this really formal program that you're following, subconsciously, you're going to continue to do a lot of that movement and it
Yeah.
will maintain that progress that you've had. If you had just been focused on an outcome based goal and you weren't really focused on the process itself, chances of you continuing to maintain that are much lower. You did not
Yeah.
value that during the process. So it becomes a very real benefit from a stress standpoint because you are no longer focusing on something that you can't control, and therefore the scale starts to lose as much power as it had over you. The changes that you're looking for and maybe an unreasonable time frame have less power that it should have had on you. And then you essentially take control. The autonomy comes into play. And now you feel like you have a say in what's going on. And you have a feel of what you can do to make adjustments, and you have essentially more confidence and control of the situation overall.
Yeah. So you are really essentially empowering people, your clients, and people that come to you to make these habits and values and of routine into their day to have sustainable change.
Some people are very receptive to this message, and some people will fight this to the death. And there are certain people that I give a break on this type of thing too.
Mhm.
If I've had super successful transformations for like weddings and stuff like that, and if people say, "Hey, this is my time frame for the wedding," I don't fight a whole lot over that because there's a legitimate time frame,
Yeah.
and the only time that you should be really focused on things like a time frame
Mhm.
or a specific weight. Time frame and
Mhm.
things like your wedding, okay, we'll work on that. But the mental expectations that you will set is that you will improve from now. You're not going to set a specific weight goal because that's not productive. But we
Yeah.
can work within a time frame. The other time that I talk about this with people is if you're doing like a weight sport,
Yeah.
then you have to have a goal of a certain weight.
Like
But
wrestling or
yes, or
powerlifting. Yeah.
powerlifting.
Yeah.
But I want people who are listening to this to really understand there's a difference there.
Mhm.
Because when you're doing this for strength, health, a better quality of life, you don't set those goals for a reason. When you're doing this for a powerlifting competition, if you have not reached your goal of your weight class within 3 or 4 days before, and you have to start doing some like drastic water cuts,
Yeah.
you are giving up health and strength benefits to meet that weight class. You're not doing it for the strength and health benefits. So
Yeah.
you are doing a strategy that is counter to the goals of a person that doesn't have that specific time limitation. If
Yeah.
you don't have that time limitation in play, you would never do those dramatic things that would be required to reach that weight goal. And honestly, when you have a strength sport that you're like that, if you're trying to lose weight to reach a goal, condition
Weight
for
class.
whatever the
Yeah.
strength sport requires, you shouldn't be that far off that mark to begin with in the off season.
Right.
And so if you're not meeting that within 3 to 4 days or so prior to, the week prior to when you're going into this competition, you
Hmm.
probably screwed up your lead into that competition to begin with.
Yeah.
And so you're making drastic changes at the end to make up for a mistake that you made.
Yeah.
And so this is not a situation that normal people are in. So I want people to understand that there is a caveat there, but the caveat is not appropriate for you
Yeah.
because you're not doing that.
Yeah, and like you said, those are sports. And even I just posted the other day about when I was competing, as a 20-year-old for, almost a decade. I failed to realize at the end when it was over abruptly against my will, um, with injuries and whatnot, that I failed to realize in that time that it was a sport,
Yeah.
and that bodybuilding was not a lifestyle. And I was just in it for so long, and you kind of lose sight of reality, I think, because my whole life was that. And you really, just like you said, with the same aspect, you'd have to, if you were more than 10 pounds over your normal look at off season, then something was not right,
Yeah, I mean,
but
competitive
also still it was
bodybuilding,
a sport.
you don't do competitive bodybuilding for health, and I don't think that
No, no,
a lot of people realize that. It's not healthy.
no, no.
It's
And
not optimally healthy. I mean, it's a lot of situations better than severe obesity, but it's not optimally healthy.
well, yeah,
And so
I would,
if you take that same strategies that you use during, times where you're contest prepping and you try to do it at other time periods, it's probably not the best use of things. And I think that that's what
whatever.
you're saying you've
Mhm.
noticed afterwards is that there were some
Oh,
less
I
than
had to change
advantage.
completely. I had to change
Right.
completely, because, what I did then, and I think that brought back to your old point too, that you brought up of somebody that was in their 40s, 50s, and beyond, of not using their 20-year-old body, whether you were a bodybuilder or not, as your goal.
Yeah.
Because that's not who you are anymore. And to not use, some of these, like you said, as a power lifter or a sport that needs to meet a certain weight, to use that as your strategy to get in better shape and health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now now that we've had those are essentially the ground rules, establishing your
Mhm.
why and then
Yep.
changing your mindset around goal setting. People they lose their goddamn mind whenever you talk about that because it's so boring. But it's literally the basis of all of this. It's like you have to talk about that because that's the foundation of the house. If
Absolutely.
you don't establish that, and that is something that most people are screwing up, if you don't
Mhm.
establish that, everything else down the line is going to suffer.
Yeah,
So
because it's so
let's
short term. It's so short term.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead, and then I have another little case to ask you about.
Well, let's talk about some easier strategies to implement
Mhm.
that may be more fun. Because I
Yeah.
like these because now that we've established the stuff that people don't really love talking about, we can get into some things that can really help you. You can put to use today. They're very easy to put to use. But
Yeah.
what I find as a coach is that the more simple and readily available something is, the more effective it is.
Mhm.
When you start to get into complicated things, like when you talk to a podcast people and they're talking about tons of like molecular mechanisms and stuff, you should probably be a little bit wary because they're trying to, really get into the weeds. The best
Yeah.
things from a practical standpoint are very easy to do and very easy to remember.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I like to do with all of my clients is teach them about fake it until you become it. And so when people are getting into a fitness journey, and even people that have been in it for a while, you find that that procrastination and having a lot of different choices is essentially the killer of momentum.
Mhm.
And so when you have issues with questions that you're facing, you don't know what you should do in a situation. You've got a couple choices. I always teach people to fake it until you become it. This is not the same as fake it until you make it. This is essentially a mindset shift technique.
Mhm.
And what you do is if you're in a situation where you've got a couple choices and you feel like you've stalled out and you're just not making a decision, ask yourself, what would a gym rat do? Or ask
Mhm.
yourself, what would a healthy person do? If you want to go to the gym regularly, but today you just really don't feel like it because it's raining outside and it feels better to be on the couch, what would a gym rat do?
Mhm.
Damn, he would get up and he would go to the gym.
Put his raincoat on and go to the gym.
Right. And so when you start to ask yourself these questions, it cuts through that indecision that is keeping you from taking the steps that you need to make. And this is a really important thing because people don't realize that motivation is the result of action. It is not generally the cause of it.
Yeah.
That's a very important concept to understand. It is much easier to feel motivated and to continue to build motivation after you've taken those first steps. The first steps are always the hardest. And so fake it until you become it to make that decision to take the first step and then realize it becomes a lot easier. I mean, how many people have had the situation where they didn't want to get into the gym because they just didn't feel like going? They forced themselves to go in and then they had a really great workout. And it doesn't have to be the best workout of all time. You just have to finish and say, hey, I feel better.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's been a single person that's gotten off the couch, gotten into the gym and said, man, I feel a lot worse than when I was vegging on the couch.
I should have just stayed home.
It feels terrible on the drive over. I'll give you that. But this is a very real example of motivation as a result of action and not necessarily the direct cause of it. And I'm not saying you don't need a little bit of motivation or to understand your why to get going, but you don't need a feeling of intense motivation to succeed, because this is, again, we're going back to working on our habits and routines that will keep you going. This is where people kind of talk about commitment, although I think that commitment is probably a bad term for it. I think that the people that seem like they're the most committed are essentially the ones that have just established those habits and routines to keep them going. And they've realized that, you know, I faked it until I became it so long that I eventually just started to view myself as a healthy person, as a gym rat. And this is what I do. You don't have to ask yourself after a time period that you've done to work this into your character, into your identity. You don't have to ask yourself, what would a gym rat do? You go, this is what I do. And you get up and you go. I go to the gym every time I go on vacation. If I go on vacation for a week, I go to the gym 3 or 4 days. And I do it. There's no obligation to do it. I want to do it because then I can sit out on the beach. I can feel like I've got a nice little pump and look better on the beach. And I can eat some more indulgent meals and not feel bad about it.
And I feel like it's better for digestion anyway, because you're going to eat the extra food and you got yourself moving in the morning.
I feel like absolute crap if I just sit around all day long.
Yeah. We always exercise. I always look at the hotels, and if there's not a hotel gym, I'll bring an exercise band and I'll see where I can walk, in the morning, or with the kids' sports. If there's not a hotel or a hotel gym, I'll make sure we can stay on the 4th floor and I can take the stairs every time.
You don't have to go to the gym if you're going on vacation. Like, I'm not trying to guilt people into this type of thing, but take advantage of staying.
Yes, you do. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, so this is what I say. I say, take advantage of staying active in whatever way that is most enjoyable for you. So if you're going to a place that has like a beach where you can swim, or like really great hikes, or whatever it is, stay active. It doesn't have to be in a gym, but at least stay active in some manner will reinstill these habits. It will make you feel better. It'll oxygenate your brain. There are no negatives to this. You get to see the environment of wherever you're visiting or whatever it is. And it's great for you. And so, there's so many benefits to the fake it until you become it mindset, because it really does shift your identity over time to what you're trying to establish. But you want to take advantage of motivation as a result of action as best as possible. And I find that in the beginning, before you establish those routines, it can be a difficult thing. So I go over another strategy called a pregame routine. And this is a way to take advantage of that snowball momentum you gain from taking action. First, you want to figure out what you want to do. And an example is you want to get into the gym more regularly. So we want to establish a pregame routine to be able to make this happen. The first thing is making it as easy as possible to start. It's something called the buy-in. Maybe you set your clothes out the night before. Maybe you pack your gym bag the night before you go to work. So you just grab the gym bag and go. If you have that ready to go, you're much more likely to make it happen at the time period when you want to make that decision. Maybe the pregame routine is you have a shaker cup and your pre-workout supplement right next to it, ready to go. If you see it, that triggers a pattern in your mind to drink the pre-workout. Once you've done that, if you do that long enough, if you follow that same set of, I drink my pre-workout, I put my clothes on, I go to the gym. Every day you'll drink the pre-workout, put your clothes on, go to the gym.
And your mind is kind of, like you said, set up for that routine.
It becomes autopilot after a while. It mentally trains you to think this has happened, therefore we're going to do X.
Yeah.
You have to think about it actively when you first start doing this, but it essentially removes that mental energy that's necessary to do this, and it creates a domino, so
Yeah.
to speak, that once that's knocked over, you do it whether you have motivation or not. And this is where people talk about, oh, I'm committed. You're not committed. You've trained yourself. You're just like Pavlov's dog. But
Yeah.
you've done it consciously to set this up in a way that works for you. And that's wonderful. Use these techniques, because Pavlov's bell is a very real thing. And
Yeah.
this is essentially a thing that we're setting up for you. And
Hmm.
so you don't need to find motivation. You just need to know how to start your routine.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
if you set these up, even when you're not feeling motivated, when you're not feeling motivated, it often feels like it's too much energy to figure out what you should do next. And that's where these strategies of the pregame routine, fake it until you become it, these really come into play very, very well, because there's no decision making involved here. You just follow a pattern. And
Yeah.
this is the difference between you and Deborah from the cul-de-sac, who is in really great shape, because people will talk in fitness circles of, oh, either, going on a fitness journey and being successful is a willpower thing. It's partly willpower, but you need to set up your situation and your environment to support your willpower. If you're constantly raw dogging your willpower, you have none of these habits and routines set up, you're going to burn out. And this is where
Yeah.
people end up on the couch. But if you set up these autopilot situations, you don't have to use any of your willpower. It just becomes what you do. And then over time is where you start to accept this motivation as becoming more intrinsic. You start to build identity around it. You start to actually enjoy the process because it's taking less mental and emotional energy. And this is where it becomes a very, very successful thing. And so
Yeah.
those are two really great strategies that you can use to get started.
I love it. So it's kind of like bake it until you become it is kind of, I'll say sometimes act as if. So you just tell yourself, I don't know if you know, but I'm a intensive cardiac rehab director. So I teach cardiac patients nutrition and mindset stuff. And I will tell them sometimes to look in the mirror and say, I am somebody who works out. So
That
is that
works.
kind of the same concept? Like fake it till you become it. I'm going to use that sometimes
It's
now.
they're the same concept. They're different. They're
Mhm.
different applications of the concept. The fake it
Yeah.
till you become it that I was talking about is
Mhm.
essentially a way to break indecision. What you
Yeah.
are doing is, and it gets towards what you're doing, but what you're
Mhm.
doing is a direct way to use the same concept to build the identity.
Like another step to that.
It's just a
Yeah.
different application of the same concept.
Yeah.
But what you're hitting on here is 100% a great way to use it. I mean,
Mhm.
if you say I'm a healthy person, I'm an athlete, that type of thing, and reinstill that, you say it enough times, you're going to believe it. I think that this is one of the reasons that we see some of these charlatans that I debunk, on
Mhm.
Instagram, the guys that are constantly putting out really bad information. I think that they're using this in a nefarious way. They're telling themselves that they're putting out good information constantly, and
Yeah.
that's how they can sleep at night. But you can use this for good. And I think that what we're talking about with our clients and the people that are listening here is using this for your benefit, in a very productive way. And I think that what you just brought up there is a very great way to use it.
Yeah, or they're telling themselves that they are the expert when they're actually not.
Yeah,
They
unfortunately,
tell
it
themselves
can be
that in the
used.
mirror.
It can be used for bad too. So make sure that you're reinforcing the good rules, because this actually is used for bad. And this is a good thing that we've kind of segued into right here really
Mhm.
quickly. People will use this for bad, and they don't think that they're using this for bad.
Mm.
People will say, "Oh, I just have a low metabolism," or
Uh,
"Oh, I just can't do that." That is
yeah,
using this
I'm
exact
too
same.
old or
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that's using this exact same concept, but taking you in the opposite direction. It
yes.
can work in both directions.
Because your brain doesn't know if it's telling the truth or a lie, right? So if you're telling it something over and over again, it will just start to, like you kind of said, believe it, whether it's bad or good.
Yeah, and then this is one of the reasons that people have the issues that they do with health and fitness, because they
Yeah.
tell themselves that they hate working out. They tell themselves that they hate doing this. They tell themselves that they're restricting their food. You're not restricting your food. You're choosing to eat a food that supports the goals that you're going to do. You're not choosing to eat pizza every single day. You're eating some fruits and veggies that you haven't eaten in 20 years.
Right.
But
Right. You're
it's not
drinking
that you're
water.
right. It's not that you're restricting pizza. It's that you're choosing to eat fruits and vegetables. The mind is a very, very powerful thing. And the way that we
Yeah.
talk to ourselves is a very important thing. And what you're doing is you're setting yourself up for success, when so many people who struggle constantly are doing the opposite thing. They're making their life worse over
Yeah.
time by constantly looking at things as restriction, by constantly looking at things as things that they're forced to do. The worst thing that you can possibly do is say, oh, I have to go to the gym. Fuck that. You have the ability to go to the gym. You have the privilege of going to the gym.
Mhm.
You are healthy enough to be able to do that. Does anybody remember when COVID started and we were stuck in our homes 24/7 and how everybody was talking about, man, I wish I could get outside, and go to the park or go to the gym or whatever it was. And then all of a sudden we were allowed to go to the gym again. And everyone's like, I don't want to go to the gym. It's
Yeah.
like, you just completely forgot the privilege that this is. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. I agree.
this is a
Yep.
real issue that we have, and that we're always looking at the negative of things. And psychologically, they've done studies on this. The negative is something that you always remember. The positive is something that leaves your mind very, very quickly.
Isn't that so strange?
Negative experiences really work, and that's actually one of the reasons why I don't have 200,000 followers on Instagram, because this is a very, very real thing. When you make posts that are inflammatory or very negative,
Mhm.
people will focus on it and they'll interact with it. And
Mhm.
that's why you see charlatans like Eddie Abu and Brecca and all these guys that like really put out like, don't do this. And like, this is something that they're trying to do to you. And this is
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. Whereas if you've got a person that's creating content like you or me, and we're saying, hey, these are the things that you should focus on, there's a
Yeah.
positive message to that.
It's like
That's
boring
It's boring as
swipe.
hell. It is
Yeah.
boring as hell. People will not hit like, they will not comment on it. Whereas if you go, guys, this is shit, eat real food. The industry is trying to screw you. They're trying to lower your health, is doing it for money. That guy is lying to you, and he's lying to you because using the negative slant gets him a lot of money.
Yeah.
And if he can tell you negative things about other people, about foods that you're eating, about things that you're doing, about things that you don't know, he becomes super famous, and you don't realize that you're being manipulated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
unfortunately, that's what's happening.
yeah, and I was going to ask you, about that too. So I mean, obviously, you've done mostly online fitness as your business, all online fitness, right? It's always been online based.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know the percentage exactly, but I do know that I've listened to quite a few things, and a lot of people, most people, I guess most in our space for sure, are getting their fitness and health information on social media, which can be pretty scary. I
Most of
don't
it.
know the percentage at all, but I know it was pretty high, especially the 30s and even 20-year olds are getting their information on TikTok or what have you. So how do you feel that we can change some of that? Or do you feel like it's kind of a lost cause and we just keep, chipping away?
I think it's a
What's
lost
your
cause.
strategy?
I think it's a lost cause. I wish I could be positive about this, but this is human psychology, and we can't change human psychology. So again, people want inflammatory. They
Mhm.
want they want
Like,
false promise. They
yeah.
want hyperbolic claims. They don't want to hear the actual answer. The actual
Yeah.
answer is get a smart omnivore diet, weight train 3 to 5 times per week, do cardio
Mhm.
twice per week, sleep 8 to 9 hours a night, and stress relief.
Yeah.
What's the
All the
answer
time,
for
forever.
what forever? Ad
Yeah.
nauseum. So how do I improve my gut health? Nutrition, training, sleep, stress relief. How do I get a better physique? Nutrition, training, sleep, stress relief. People don't want to hear that because
Yeah.
one, it doesn't seem fun. Two, if that's the answer, then they feel a little bit culpable for where they are. And you should,
Yeah.
because you are culpable for where you are. But that's
Yeah.
not necessarily a bad thing, because accepting responsibility for where you are is one of the necessary first steps to actually improving where you are. And
Yeah.
so there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I'm partially to blame for the situation that I'm in, health wise, physique wise, all that, because it's based off of my habits and routines.
Mhm.
That's okay, because as long as you're working to improve those habits and routines and expect more of yourself, you're doing the noble thing.
Yeah.
And then you shouldn't feel guilty because you didn't have the right information because you were listening to some kid on TikTok, or
Yeah.
some dude that is, inflating his credentials on TikTok that has a large following. And unfortunately, we equate following with credibility, when unfortunately it appears that these super large following people are some of the least credible, and it's because of the way that you can get a super large following.
Mhm. Do you think that sometimes, maybe I give too many of benefits of the doubt for people, that maybe they get caught in this loop of information, and then even if they know better, they still will not ever say anything different because they get like pigeonholed to this one statement? or kind of who they
Yes.
become?
Yeah, I think it becomes monetarily expedient to claim to
Yeah.
be a person that's a little bit different than everybody else. Like the thing that really pops into my mind when you said that is there are there are people that claim to be coaches that give you a special program through the menstrual cycle and through
God.
menopause.
Yeah.
And this isn't a thing.
Yeah.
There is no evidence that you need to change
That's
anything
hot right now
throughout.
too.
I
That's
know
so
it really
crazy.
is. Actually, Alan Aragon and I wrote a big piece because there's a lot of wrong information that's being disseminated to women
Mhm.
about how you're going to gain all of this extra weight during menopause and lose a lot of muscle during menopause, and it's really being misrepresented to people. So if you really want to hear the real answer
Mhm.
on what's going on there, the November 2024 issue of the Alan Aragon Research Review has the definitive answer in there, and we give literally all the research and break it down
Oh,
for you. And
awesome.
so, unfortunately, that's I don't get anything for saying that, by the way. I'm just pushing where the good information is.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that's not what's being shown online. People are faking things like, oh, you can't do this zone of cardio, or oh, you have to eat in this way after menopause because there's blah blah blah. And they're giving absolutely bullshit reasons.
Well, yeah, because they want to be different and
Right.
they don't want to be wrong. And we're vulnerable. Women are vulnerable and we want things and we feel sad. And there's all these, it's very emotional.
Well,
And
women are vulnerable because you're experiencing something that men don't experience. And when we talk about the fact that there's no difference in the way that you train or the way that you eat in any part of your menstrual cycle, and this is literally shown in all the research that there's no
mhm,
such thing as cycle syncing.
mhm,
There's
mhm,
there's no such thing as training differently before or after menopause. There's no
yeah,
reason to do such a thing. There is such a thing because they're selling these programs, but there's no reason to do such a thing.
right.
Um, Women's experience during these periods is 100% valid.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's why people can prey on you
Hmm.
because you have a harder experience than men during a lot of these times. Throughout menopause, maybe your joints hurt more, maybe you can't sleep as well, maybe you're having hot flashes, maybe your stomach
Hmm.
hurts, maybe I mean, you're going through all these things that men are never going to go through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, the
And I
experience
mean,
the experience is different.
yeah, and I mean, even now I'm in the thick of perimenopause, and I know that I am because every month is different.
My
But
wife my wife is going through it too,
yeah,
and so you see these things really really well, and so I don't want people to take the message when I'm saying you don't do anything different to say that things aren't different. Things are
mhm,
different from an experience standpoint. However, if you look at the research, we're not really seeing more fat gain from menopause and more lean muscle loss from
mhm,
menopause when you actually control for nutrition and training.
yes,
So, if you continue eating correctly, you continue working out the way that you did before,
mhm,
things don't seem to change. And there is research showing this that when you control for these things, there's no change. The problem that we really see with the data where they'll like, a charlatan will be like, oh, look, and the Swan study is a big one right now that they will point towards. And they'll be like, oh, women gained like twice as much body fat and lost like a third more lean muscle during this period and that's proof that the menopause is changing you. Well, yeah, I mean, if women feel like shit, they're probably not eating as well, and they're probably not going to the gym as much.
right. I was just gonna say, I have weeks and months when I'm not sleeping as well, I certainly have some hot flashes. My joints might hurt some days, but you know what I've learned through all of it is, and then one person I love to follow. I don't know if you follow Dr. Jessica Shepard. She's she wrote a whole book on it, and she is is very much in the same mindset of just empowering women to stick to it and to stick to it through it because what I've found is that I just have less wiggle room than when you were 20, but I feel like men are the same. I see my husband have less wiggle room at almost 45, than he did at 20. As far
Yeah,
as nutrition and muscle and that kind of thing. So I feel like there's just those, like you said, there may be days when I don't sleep as well when I'm not going to get as good of a workout. But that's just
well,
because I wasn't sleeping well.
it's funny because these people that are pushing this message that things change dramatically, and that therefore you need a special program or you need to avoid this type of cardio because of cortisol or some other bullshit that they've
Yeah,
made
that's
up.
what I was going to bring up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know it's bullshit. There's no data supporting what they're saying
Yeah, talk
about.
about the cortisol belly
Yeah.
and all that
So,
kind of stuff. Yeah.
so one thing that really does happen to women, and I want this to be clear.
Mhm.
Women, when they go through menopause, they have a shift in adiposity. You
Mhm.
have a shift where you store body fat. So post menopause, you're going to store more body fat in your midsection than you've ever stored before.
Mhm.
This is different than menopause caused the fat gain.
Yes.
It didn't cause the fat gain. It caused where you're storing it to shift. So
Shift
you're not storing it in
going
your butt and
more.
your thighs anymore, where
Mhm.
as predominantly as you were before. You're storing it in your gut. And so
Right.
women will say, "Well, I know that I gain more fat." No, you're gaining more fat because you're eating in a calorie surplus because you feel like shit, and now
Mhm.
it's going to your stomach, whereas you've never seen that before.
Yeah.
The Swan study
True.
is the one that really comes out and comes to mind because this is what the charlatans are using right now to really convince women that there's a major difference.
Mhm.
If there is any difference, there doesn't appear to be when you control for nutrition and training. The
Yeah.
Swan study used women who did not control for nutrition and training. They used a general sedentary population. So, one, that's a major issue.
Yeah.
Two, let's assume that we'll take the data at face value and they'll show you a graph and they will show you fat gain increased like 2 times. Don't quote me on the exact number, but fat
Yeah.
gain increased like twice over what it was if you just control for age. Muscle loss increased by like a third if you just look at an age related control. When you step back and you stop looking at the graph that this charlatan has given you that shows this big up in like the fat gain and this big drop in the muscle loss,
Mhm.
if you look at the absolute values from the Swan study, which is I keep saying this because this is the one that they're using as the proof of what they're saying.
Sure.
If
Yeah.
you look at the course of the time period, and I think it's 9 years, so nearly 10 years that they followed these women, and you're telling people that they gained over 10 years twice as much body fat and lost a third more muscle, then you look at the absolute data and you realize that what they've done is they've created a graph that is using like a microscope to zoom in to make the graph look huge as far as like the drops and the changes.
Wow.
The fat gain was like 3.5 total extra pounds over
Yeah.
10 years.
Wow.
And the muscle loss was 0.45 pounds. You lost less than half of a pound of muscle, and you're telling people that because of menopause, they're dramatically losing all of this muscle and they're gaining all this. You gained 3 pounds of fat, and
Yeah.
this is in a population that's not even exercising.
Yeah.
Like, what are
Yeah.
we doing here? But they're
Right.
showing them a graph, and the graph is so zoomed in that what's really hilarious is if you know how graphs are set up, they've got the y-axis and the x-axis. So the
Yep.
x-axis is the time, and the y-axis is like the absolute amounts. There's never any numbers over here, but there's this
Yeah.
like massive like jump the second that they hit
Right.
menopause. And when Alan and I were writing this thing, we were looking at it and we were like, what the hell is this graph? Like, not only is it not a valid graph because there's no numbers on the graph to show you what it means. It's so zoomed in to make it look like there's this dramatic effect of menopause that is probably due to the fact that these women feel like crap. And
Yeah.
then you look at the data where they actually control for these types of things, and you see that outside of the age related losses that exist, we
Yes.
don't see RMR going down. We don't see metabolic rate dropping. We don't see significant amounts of fat gain. We see that if you actually continue to weight train and eat right, that not only do these issues appear to not happen at all, maybe you improve over this time period.
Yeah.
Particularly for women who are just hearing this and they're like, "I've never really weight trained in my life." Shit, if you start weight training in the middle of perimenopause when you've never trained in your life, you're going to come out much better looking than you were before.
Oh, yeah, yeah, and that's where you
And
see you're like, "Wow, she's 45, she's 50," like, and they'll compare it to their 20-year-old body that never worked out before, and it's just vastly different, and they're like, "I feel so much better." And like you said, it's basically everybody just goes back to the basics and continues them over and over and over forever and ever and ever at some capacity
yeah, and I mean,
without
this is
a
a
day.
conversation that we've gone down this road because it's such an infuriating thing to see. Because essentially,
Yeah,
what you're telling these women is, for the cycle syncing people, you're telling these women that if you actually look, do you know what cycle syncing is?
yeah, yeah,
Okay. So for the
yeah,
people
I
that
have to debunk that very often,
I would think
because
that I would think that you would, but I didn't want to be
yeah,
like overplaying it. But for
no,
everybody else that isn't aware, because I'm sure there are a lot of listeners that aren't
yeah,
aware.
yeah, or
Cycle
they might
syncing,
have heard it and don't know what it is, sure.
right. Cycle syncing, essentially, when you talk to these gurus that push cycle syncing, they suggest that for 2 weeks in a women's cycle, you have decreased strength.
Mm.
And so you decrease power output, decrease strength, all these different types of things because of where your hormones are. And so they suggest lowering the amount of weight that you lift or lowering the volume. It's dependent on who you talk to. Because this is made up, it kind of varies.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's
your
the key right
hormones.
there. Because this is made up, you're going to hear varied information. That's a
Yeah, so
good
if somebody
flag.
else is telling you something that I'm not saying here, it's because it's made up, and that's
Yeah.
why there's no standardization of this. And
Yeah.
so, yes, they will show you a graph that shows you that your hormones change during your menstrual cycle because no shit, it does. But if you actually look at women that tell themselves mentally, even though I might feel like crap, I'm going to continue going in and continue to work out hard, we see no drops in performance at all.
Yeah.
And so there's no reason to cycle sync. If you have you do it the same way that any man would do it.
Mhm.
If you have a day that you feel like absolute shit for whatever reason, now it might be for a reason that a man doesn't have. Maybe you are having cramps that are really putting you out of commission. Well, see if you can get into the gym like you regularly would and maybe lift less than what you did. That
Sure.
doesn't mean that for 2 straight weeks you automatically throw it in the garbage.
Yeah,
You
but that's
handle
based on
things.
an individual symptom. So
Yes.
everybody, like you said,
And you
everybody's gonna be different.
Yeah, and you take it on that day. So maybe
Mhm.
the next day you're back at hitting the weights really hard, the same way a man would. The
Mhm.
same training protocol works for a man. I didn't go to sleep last night because I had caffeine too late. Well,
Mhm.
maybe that's akin to a woman didn't go to sleep because she was having hot flashes. Well, maybe the next day you don't try to max a bench press then
Yeah.
because you're fatigued.
Yeah. And
It's
then
auto-regulation.
I think people will start to think at that point, they would say to themselves, well, that must have been true what I was listening to. Like you said, goes back to the mindset. Well, I better just get on the treadmill or I better just go home anyway and just, rest for a couple of weeks because that's absolutely true because I feel weaker today. So it must be true.
We are
So,
sabotaging women
mhm,
by taking advantage of them when they are in a state of change in what their body
mhm,
is feeling, whether it's a change in your menstrual cycle from month to month, whether it's a change because of menopause. And we are telling women that they're broken. You're broken
yeah,
for 2 weeks out of the month. You're broken after menopause versus when you were before, when this is all absolute bullshit. And so these people that are claiming to be on women's side, if you ever hear somebody say women aren't small men, run,
mhm,
run very, very fast. They are trying to con you. The
yeah,
only person that says women aren't small men are con artists. And the reason that only those people say that is because people that aren't con artists realize that you take each situation as it is. Sometimes men and women have the exact same interaction or response to whatever the topic is because women are still human. And trying
yeah,
to pretend that women aren't human is just as problematic as pretending that there aren't some differences. And so people will always point out, well, I want to prove that women are really different. Look at how women metabolize anesthetics or like some drug. And that'll
yeah.
be their point. And you'll be like, but that's not weight training.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah,
so
yeah,
it
for sure.
doesn't
That's
carry over
2
in all these
totally
areas.
different conversations.
Right. And so that specific drug isn't what we're talking about. And
Mhm.
yes, there are situations where women and men do things differently, but for as far as we know, pretty much everything in fitness and nutrition, it's the same thing because we're still both human. What's really funny is I actually do know one difference that women have from men that I can think of off the top of my head that's really relevant outside of things like, yeah, after menopause, you might need some hormone replacement therapy to feel better so you can auto regulate a little bit better.
That's a
And
feeling though. That's that yeah, that's
that
a
doesn't
feeling
change
or
that doesn't
process.
change metabolism. It doesn't change your ability to build lean muscle. That has nothing to do with hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah,
But if it's completely destroying your performance because your joints constantly hurt because you don't have enough estrogen in your body, yeah, hormone replacement therapy might help
100%.
because that will
Agree.
allow you to work out the way that you're supposed to be working out.
Yeah,
But that's apparently, I mean, that's obviously individual specific.
yeah,
But
and
the
that's an
only
individual decision on that woman and her physician and weighing all of the pros and cons, and as you said, it's just a feeling. So I'm pretty strong with that conversation and saying that's so individual. There's nothing that's straight across the board, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and if you need hormone replacement therapy, I support you in that because it can improve
Absolutely.
quality of life, but
Yeah,
that doesn't change the way that you train or the way that you eat.
yes.
And so the only thing that I can think of off the top of my head, I'm sure there's probably one that I'm missing, but you're not really going to change how you program for anybody. The only thing
Mhm.
that I can think of is women actually recover better from
Mhm.
exercise than men do. And so
Don't tell my husband that because he's
So
like,
you,
"What? What?"
so you still wouldn't program differently, because the way that you would program for a man is the same way that you would still program for a woman, because there's going to be individual variation on how a man recovers. One man's going to recover different than another man from weight training.
I like to
So
make
you
fun of him because he's still sore and I'm not, so I'm not even gonna let him listen to that part of
see,
the
so
podcast.
you experience what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so women recover better from weight training as a general
Mhm.
rule. But that doesn't change how you program. You program if you're not recovering, you make a choice to alleviate that. You make a choice to get in with a person's recoverable capacity. And so that means either you need to get better with your nutrition, you need to sleep better, you need to maybe lower the volume in the training that you're doing. But that's individual specific. So there's not a program that's going to be for women and a program that's going to be for men that is not entirely based off of preference. That's the only reason that you would have a difference in programming. If a
Yeah.
woman says, I don't want to train my biceps, I want a bigger butt, so I want to prioritize that, then you prioritize the butt. But if a
Right.
man says, I don't want to train biceps, I want to train my butt, you would do the exact same program for that
Yes.
man.
Yes.
And so you're not doing anything with programming different that is
Mhm.
not personal preference.
So there's those almost like yeah, that's exactly what kinda came to my mind was kind of these gender differences of wanting a certain look.
Sure.
Like you said, like arms or, what have you. Yeah, for sure.
But
I
again, this goes
totally
back to
agree
the
with that.
entire conversation of, it's not that women aren't small men, it's that women are individual humans. And so an individual
Mhm.
human will react to the specificity of the training that you have in place. So you change the specificity of training for that person's preference. And it has nothing
Mhm.
to do with women not being small men. And so
Yeah.
there's nothing more deceitful than saying women aren't small men, because
Yeah.
you're intentionally trying to suggest to women that you're very different.
Yeah.
And unless you actually have proof of a specific situation in which you vary, and there are some, they just don't really seem to be in fitness and nutrition, then that comment has no place unless you're trying to manipulate someone emotionally.
Yeah, and I mean, that kinda takes me back to my old bodybuilding days with my coach, which I still love very much. She's still a friend. Would we would train as young bodybuilders and old bodybuilders and fitness competitors and his professional football players all the same. We trained all the same. And he would always say, if you want to look like an athlete, you train like one. And we
You do.
just trained. We just trained. And
You do.
us, of course, if I had to work on a certain part or, bring it up or down, that was different. But
Yeah.
the main concept, the meat of the program was always the same: young, old, male, female.
Yeah, you train the same.
Mhm.
Now you might see people having a women's program and a men's program. If they're saying, this one's for glutes and quads, and this one's more for chest. I mean, that could have some relevance, but that's not
Yeah, for
men and
sure.
women specific, because women might say, hey, I want bigger shoulders, and run the
Yeah,
men's
and that
program.
would just be again, basing the general concept of men want to go in and bench press all the time, where women want
Sure.
to go train legs. Yeah, so
Yeah, I
that
mean,
would be for sure too.
I'm sure that you see the same thing. I've got women all the time that come in and they're like, I don't really want to work chest a whole lot, and I mean, that's just a general thing that happens. And men don't really often say, I really want to work my glutes. Now they'll
Yeah.
say, I want to squat and I want to deadlift, but in their
Yes.
mind, they're not saying, I want to work my glutes. I've rarely
Mhm.
heard that from men. It's just not one of our priorities, even though it tends to happen when we
Yeah.
when we train legs. But
You
the
guys
way that I
naturally get that from the power exercises that you tend to gravitate towards, I think.
yeah, I mean, it
You get a
comes
lot
from
of it
general
through.
training anyways.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so with the women that come to me and say, I don't want to train this, or I would like to focus on this, I'll say, okay, well, we can deprioritize this and we can focus
Mhm.
on this. And so I'll never, it's really funny, unless there's a reason to, I'll never say, okay, you don't have to do any chest. Because if we don't ever train a muscle, then you're
Mhm.
going to be at a greatly increased risk for injury in
Oh, yeah.
in a lot of different
Imbalance.
areas. Yeah. And
Mhm.
so we want to do something, but like maybe only do a dumbbell bench press, like one set, or sorry, like 4 or 5 sets a week, one exercise, and then call it a day. And you say, okay,
Yeah.
well, that's not your focus, and that's okay, because we're at
Mhm.
least covering it, so it's being worked. We're getting you ready for life, and everything that it throws at you, but we're not prioritizing it. And that's perfectly fine. And so I don't want
Yeah.
people to think that there's not some differences in programming, but the differences in programming are simply up to preference.
That's complete different conversation, as you just kind of basically said. Programming is a different conversation than what your body is actually capable of.
Right. Or that what your body, or what is necessary for your body,
What it
depending
needs.
on
Yeah.
shifts in hormones, which don't appear to really be, a major thing as far as this goes.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you really quickly. I wanted to bring this little case to you. So let's say you have a woman, she is postmenopausal. Um, she 55, 60. She's been a yo-yo dieter her whole life. So this would be somebody that I would deal with almost on a regular basis. Not all the time, but definitely see a lot of in my space. Um, and she's somebody that struggles still with that mindset of just wanting to be a smaller version at all cost. And she has come up, she has made progress. Her only quote in her mind saying, I have gotten stronger. That's her only thing. But she doesn't really still love the way that she looks because she's not a smaller version, even if she's tighter. And she just wants to throw in the towel and go back to those 1,200 calories, those 1,100 calories, the 900 calories, even, which just makes me cringe. And just continue to do that because she feels lighter. She feels better on the scale. How would you help this woman to not only shift her mindset? Of course, we know that that's where you're going to boil that down, but how do you do that while honoring what they want and how they feel inside?
So I'm going to give you an answer that you probably don't expect from this. Sometimes what people want and what
Mhm.
you know is right as a coach are not in alignment.
Sure,
And so
absolutely.
you have these conversations with people as best as you possibly can. And you say, okay, look, what are the signs of progress that you've seen during this journey? Do you value these at all? And what you're telling me is that she's essentially saying no, that she doesn't.
Yes.
There's a possibility that body dysmorphia is in play.
Yes.
And there's a possibility that her goal is to actually become less healthy. And
Without
so
without realizing that, I'm
without
sure.
realizing it,
You
yes.
should
And
never say, "Oh, I wanna be unhealthy." I think that sometimes these women see these very healthy bodies and they say, "I wanna look like that, but I don't wanna maybe not necessarily do what it takes to get there." That's not the conversation, but I I don't know if I could do that because I'm so stuck on being small.
sometimes they're not the client for you.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because people want the answer of how do I convince a person to do this? And I've been in this situation enough times. I mean, I've seen enough clients throughout the years that we
Yeah.
have these honest, open conversations with people, and you state your case and you say, hey, look, what questions do you have? Like where do you think that you should go with this? But if you're telling me that what she's requesting is consistently like, I just need to go down to 900 calories, can you make this happen?
Or I just wanna
There's
be
a
smaller, I just wanna be smaller, I just wanna be smaller
there's a good chance that that is not in alignment with your values
as a coach.
as a coach.
Yeah.
And so having that conversation can be the actual only chance that you have to change their minds, because they're going to keep, if you're very wishy-washy about this, and
Mhm.
you're hoping that there is a political way to be able to give them an answer, but you're telling me that you've had these conversations with people, that
Mhm.
you have laid out the benefits of
Mhm.
having some more lean muscle. You've laid out the process to getting to where she wants to be. And maybe it's she needs to build some lean muscle before she can cut down to get there, and she's not willing to do that.
So, but okay,
Then
but
you
right
have that
there.
then you have the conversation of this is how you get to where you want to be. And you consistently trying to put yourself into a situation that is essentially maybe malnutrition
Mhm.
and counter to your health. I would have to refer you to a registered dietitian, because what you're doing is something that I feel is not going to benefit you health wise.
Long
And
term.
so yes, and so
Mhm.
I'm always very honest with people, and I'll say, hey, look, I can make you lose weight. If just to lose weight, we can make you lose weight, but this is not my type of coaching. This is not helpful for you. You would love me for 2 to 3 months, and then a year down the road, as you start to have some health problems, and as you start to
Mhm.
have osteoporosis and sarcopenia and injuries and all these
Yeah.
other things, you start to wonder why this is happening when you are healthy.
Yeah.
um, I wouldn't be able to live with myself with that. And so
Sure.
being honest with a person is the only thing that you can do. And then sometimes saying, look, if this is what you require, you know, I want to really, suggest that you talk with a registered dietitian about this because I feel this is unhealthy, but this is just not something that I can condone and
Yeah.
support. That's what you have to do because
Or it's
either
out
the
of my wheelhouse.
I wouldn't even say that
Yeah.
because it's not in anybody's wheelhouse to take somebody down to the situation that you're positing here is suggesting that it's an unhealthy practice. And so
Hmm.
I would say that you're smart enough and you're experienced enough as a coach that I would trust you in this judgment.
Hmm.
And you can do these things for short-term periods of time. And I would even in your situation bring up I was a competitive bodybuilder. And so I
Hmm.
dropped to what I understand are unhealthy levels of body fat percentage to chase whatever this physique goal.
Yeah.
And I realized that it's not sustainable. And I realized that it's something that you can only maintain for a week or two. And I'm not trying to put you in a situation to make you happy for, a few weeks and then just pull the rug out from under you to
Yeah.
bring you back up to where you want to be. So,
True.
if we can talk about this and come to a mutually beneficial decision, then that's great. If not, I would be happy to refer you to a registered dietitian because this is not something that is within my scope of practice.
Yeah.
But I wish that there was a really distinct answer, but you're not going to convince all of these people to
I
be
think that's a
healthy.
distinct answer. I think it is. I mean, you
I wish
can't
there was a
change.
distinct answer that would actually convince them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I probably both wish that.
I mean,
So
I've spent days and days and days in these conversations with people. I mean,
yeah.
anytime somebody signs up with a
Same.
coach, you're much more likely to get this type of person. I mean, somebody who has some body dysmorphia issues is more likely to seek out a coach
Yeah.
because they're constantly chasing something they can't attain, and they're
Hmm.
hoping that the next coach will allow them to attain it. But
Yeah.
the issue isn't that the coach. The issue is their goal,
Yeah.
and
And to
and a
go
lot
back
of
to your
times.
why and what it actually is, I think, yeah.
And
I
if you truly suspect that body dysmorphia is in play, I would also recommend suggesting speaking with a psychiatrist.
yeah. 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 Especially like you said with the registered dietitian would be a great place to start. And then you kind of throw that in the conversation. I have a few dietitians that I can refer out. um, I always like to tell people to take the pressure off. None of us are perfect. And we have forever. We have
Yeah,
our whole life.
you also are going to have to find for everybody that's going on this journey, you're going to find that most likely your end goal and what you end up being at are different things because
Yeah.
we have these views from Instagram of these like really dramatic end goals. And the really dramatic end goals tend to be people on steroids or other drugs that allow them to.
And this is why I refrain a lot of before and afters. I will share them occasionally, but I don't share that many at all for
You
that.
know, I don't work with people on drugs, so I don't really feel bad about sharing those. And I'm sure that you don't either. But those the issue is that we're inundated with
Hmm.
these changes or with these physiques from the really popular influencers, and
Hmm.
it's not something that's attainable for the general population. And so they'll fight to get there, and then they'll realize that it doesn't fit within their life because even to get close to what they think that they want in their mind, they have to essentially like give up pizza forever or, give
Yeah.
up, whatever it is that gives them some better quality of life that allows them to be more adherent to an overall nutritious diet. And you'll often find that when you go in with working with a coach, you'll have this idea in your mind of what you want to be. And then assuming you continue on, that evolves over time. And
Yeah.
then maybe rather than being quite as lean as what you thought, maybe you're 3 or 4 body fat percentage points higher, but you can have that donut or you can go out on
Mhm.
Friday night and you can feel more comfortable. And so that's where you become really comfortable. But the good thing is if you get to that point, it's a conscious choice on your part, and then you don't feel like you're missing out on anything.
Yeah. I have a couple people in my head that I am thinking that I worked with that they came in for a certain goal, and I have one, she actually works with the sheriff's department, and she's younger, in her mid-30s, and she came in the other day and she said, "I've gained a little bit of weight, but I can see this more muscle." And I said, "Well, great. So what's your non-scale victory?" And this was one of the best ones I think out of 20 some years of coaching that she said, I just want to be somebody that everybody wants to work with, that I don't get on my shift and people say, "Oh, I'm working with her again." And she said, "I don't want to be a liability." And she said, "I notice now that I'm taking the upper body of carrying these people out from somewhere, and the guys are taking the lower body." And she showed me how to pick them up, and it's really hard. And I
Yeah.
said, "Yes, like I love that, that non-scale victory." So she shifted a lot too. Like you said, she came in with this kind of body goal, not understanding what she kind of even wanted.
Yeah.
And then she shifted to that over the past like couple of years. So that was pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
Sustainability is important. And you kind of realize on that on that journey what is sustainable and what is not within your life, and the answer is different for each person. And so,
Yeah.
genetics come into play, certainly, and lifestyle choices come into play. Some people are just more social than others. Some people depend more on the food that they eat when they're out socializing than others. Many people can shift their mindset and make it about the experience with other people and less about the food, which is something
Yeah.
that I recommend for everybody. But
I
there's
had to
certainly
learn that.
people. Well,
Hmm.
there are certainly people that really focus more on the food, and if that's the case, well, then maybe you're not going to have as distinct abs. But that's
Yeah.
okay, because maybe you realize that and you're happy with where you are and you're in a healthy, weight range and body fat percentage range, and life is great and your quality of life is very high.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say I could probably have more defined abs. Genetically, my body doesn't like it. I would have to diet too hard to have them. And I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
It's not a value for me. I wanted to ask you really quickly before we get off. What about fasting and time restricted eating? Are those two things different in your mind? And are they even important for fat loss and muscle gain?
They're just a sliding scale of fasting,
Mhm.
essentially. I mean, time restricted eating. An easier way to look at time restricted eating is just to call it skipping breakfast. There's no benefit to fasting. Hard stop.
Outside of the eating calorically,
The
less.
any benefit that's been attributed to fasting is due to the calorie deficit itself.
Yeah.
Autophagy, body composition, blood lipids, cardiometabolic factors, literally, I mean, anything that you want to name. Any claim that you want to make for fasting has nothing to do with the fasting.
Mm,
It has everything to do with the calorie restriction itself. And
yeah.
so any study that you look at that actually equates protein and calories
Hmm.
between conditions, the continuous diet has the exact same benefits.
Mm.
Now, fasting long term, fasting more than that 16-8 intermittent
Like
fasting window,
intermittent
or
fasting.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like
Like
a
from like a
16-8
day.
intermittent fasting window.
Mhm.
Fasting longer than that comes with probably some pretty significant negatives.
Like
Um,
muscle
mi-
loss and stuff.
Micronutrient deficiencies, lean muscle loss of
Mhm.
performance, all these different types of things. I mean, intermittent fasting itself is probably not optimal for building lean muscle or performance,
Mhm.
but you can maintain muscle on it and you can lose body fat doing it.
Yeah.
And so if your goal is just to lose body fat, it's certainly a very good tool. But again, if you just look at it as I'm just skipping breakfast, that's exactly what it is. There's nothing
Yeah.
magical to it. It's just skipping breakfast
Or skipping dinner and
or
then just.
skipping dinner, however you have it set up. It's
Mhm.
literally just that's it. And so
Yeah.
all of these people that come in and start making these claims for longevity and stuff, I mean, the research is rather clear on it that there's no benefit to it.
Yeah.
Um, you
Outside of
know,
like the teaching, maybe, your body to only need so many calories or whatever.
oh,
Yeah.
that's
Just not eating every
might be a
second.
satiation thing. But what's really interesting is that there are some people that are more hungry by having the intermittent fasting than not, and it's just kind of a person specific thing
Yeah.
and how a
Yeah.
person experiences it. But the biggest issue is that people will point out the original like autophagy
Mhm.
research to suggest that this is the way to do it. And the only reason that autophagy was increased during that period is because they took people that weren't calorie restricting and they had them not eat. If you don't eat, you calorie restrict. And so autophagy, of
Yeah.
course, went up. But there are other ways to make it go up. Just a general calorie deficit, you know, and like as a base will do that.
Yeah.
If you're not obese or not overweight, constantly trying to build autophagy by not eating is a net negative in
Yeah.
health because
Yeah.
you're not obese. So you're not getting those health benefits that losing excess body fat provide. There are other ways to get autophagy benefits.
Mhm.
Exercise itself upregulates autophagy without
Yeah, I
the
was gonna say, I think exercise is more beneficial for that, isn't it?
it's a better use of your
If
time.
somebody wanted to really focus on that.
Yeah.
Um,
Again,
mhm.
this the same thing that we were talking about before. What do I do to increase autophagy? Nutrition, training, sleep, stress relief.
Back to
Like
the
it's
basics
always it's always the
forever.
same answer. And that's why nobody likes the people that give the right answers.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna go back to the same thing. You're like, well, then what about like fasting and cold plunging? don't do it. If there's no reason to do it, don't do it. Like there's nothing, there's no benefit to these things. It's just micromanaging it and making you lose focus on what's important.
Yeah. Yeah. If you don't
So
have the,
fasting, can it be used well? Yeah, it can. And intermittent fasting, a 16-8 is a good strategy if it helps you
Mhm.
control your daily calorie intake and it gets you out of obesity or being
It
overweight.
gets you in the habits of eating at maybe appropriate times or, regular intervals almost.
Well,
Um,
some people just don't like to eat breakfast too, and like for me,
yeah.
I don't really like to eat until I haven't eaten breakfast yet. I don't eat until like 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. on like a normal person's schedule.
Yeah. See, I'm a eat right away when I wake up person, and my husband's the same as you. He'll usually wait until, 9, 10, 11 in the
Mhm.
morning to eat when we're up at 5 or
And
whatever.
that's fine. That doesn't mean that we're intermittent fasting. That just means that that's the way that we eat. Now,
Just
if I
normal.
eat 3,500 calories from 11 until 9 p.m., then is that fasting? It's and
No.
it doesn't matter. And it's funny because people will get into this intermittent fasting type thing, and they'll be like, "Well, I want to intermittent fast." I'm like, "Okay, cool." And so I'll set that up for them, and they'll be
Mhm.
like, "Can I have like a shake in the morning?" I'm like, "Yes." They're like, "But it'll break my fast." I'm like, "It doesn't matter. Like, it
Mm,
makes no difference whether you break the
right.
fast or not."
Right.
And
Yeah.
in fact, if we really want to get down to things, training while satiated produces
Mhm.
better performance than training unsatiated.
Mm.
And so
I was gonna
over
ask you about
time,
training while you're eating before you work out. What's your thoughts and what's your preference maybe?
it's probably a good idea. When we look at like cardio and that type of stuff and fat loss, whether you're fasted or fed really makes no difference as
Mhm.
far as we currently know.
Mhm.
However, when you look at like weight training and performance in weight training is better fed.
Yeah.
And
I
this is due to,
always have to eat
this is
before I
due to a
work out.
satiation. This is due to a satiation response. Now there are going to be people that will tell you that they feel better training without eating. And if that's the case, that's okay if that's your preference, but then you need to eat something sooner post
Yeah.
workout rather than before. But
So so if you don't eat before you exercise or wait, let's just say weight training for this purpose.
okay.
If you don't eat, then it's a good idea to eat really quick, like within a half hour or so of post workout. But
We're combining two ideas here.
Mhm,
So the idea of performing better in the gym from a
mhm.
satiation standpoint probably makes sense to eat before we train.
But then do you
So
still have to eat after?
hold on. So what this is two ideas. This is how I want to like kind of bring it together.
Okay.
It's a little bit complex, but once you talk about it, it makes sense.
Okay.
So if we want to have good training over time, it probably makes sense to eat before we train.
Yes.
And so the idea is that if we're having better performance over time, that will lead to more performance increases. It will lead to more gains in lean muscle. So by training yourself to have at least something before you eat something before you train, you're probably giving yourself a benefit.
Mhm.
Then the other topic is, what do we have to do from a protein serving standpoint to maximize our return? And this is where the original conversation of the anabolic window came into play. And for people that don't know, I know that you know, but for people that don't know, the anabolic window was this idea that we had to have a large protein serving within 30 minutes of weight training to have the best anabolic response.
Yes. That was
As
old
the,
bodybuilding stuff for sure.
yeah, and what's really funny is they're now saying that this is only for women out of menstruation age. And that's bullshit too. That's completely made up.
Yeah.
But a lot of those influencers that are doing the cycle syncing and all that stuff are pushing this for women again. But what
Yeah.
the data actually shows is that one, your total daily intake matters far more than anything else. So if
Okay.
you are not hitting your daily totals, focus on that. Ignore everything that I'm going to say for the rest of the podcast.
Mhm.
You're not having problems hitting daily totals. There is likely some benefit to manipulating variables to putting a protein dose, about 30 grams, 25 to 30 grams, depending on the person, or
Mhm.
more, around the workout. Now, rather than it being a 30-minute window post workout, based on the current literature, it appears to be about a 6-hour barn door around
Wow.
the workout itself. And
6
what I mean
hours.
by Mhm.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is the window before and after about a 6-hour period. And so if you're training after an overnight fast, which is called sleep, you're
Yes.
going to be training in a really fasted state. And so if you're doing it and you're not eating anything and you go in and you train, if you really want to get the best return for your effort, it probably
Mhm.
makes sense to eat sooner afterwards because you have no circulating amino acid pool. Because it's
Mm.
been what, 12 hours, 10 hours since you got up, you slept for 8 hours, you went and trained for 2 hours, and now it's been 10 hours. So it probably makes sense to have a bolus dose of protein soon after. If you wake up, you slam a protein shake, you have an apple, you go and you train, you probably have a few hours afterwards. You don't really need to worry about it. You can eat afterwards, and there's no negative to eating afterwards. So if you're a bodybuilder and you're a little bit paranoid and you're trying to eke out that last percent, they will definitely eat before and after. An hour before and then immediately after. They'll definitely do that. And it's not going to hurt them. But the current data suggests that that's probably not necessary, and it's definitely not necessary for the large majority of people.
So
but
like, don't freak out about it.
No, you're going to be fine. But because again, total daily totals matter more than anything else. So eat whenever you can. But if we're scheduling this and we want to manage this, and it's not a burden on us to manage this type of thing, then if you prefer to train when you are fasted, then bring a protein shake with you, or get home and immediately eat a meal or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a fast acting protein, but getting in a dose, if you prefer to train fasted when you get home, probably makes sense, because otherwise you might leave a little few percentage on the table.
Yeah.
And so I don't want people to like really lose sight of the forest for the trees when I give this information, which is why I said stop listening to me after this, after that one point. But I do want people to realize that that's exactly what the data is showing right now. And it's not a make or break to micromanage meal timing.
Yeah.
But there is probably some benefit to doing it, particularly if gaining lean muscle is a focus. It's not going to make a difference most likely in fat loss, but it might make a difference in gaining some lean muscle.
I think it's easy to just kind of develop those habits. Like you said in the beginning, it's just kind of a habit and a routine. I eat my protein shake and my coffee every day, and I put my exercise shorts on and I go downstairs and I lift weights, and then I have some oatmeal, so it's just very systematic, and it just makes it easy. I think that kind of stuff makes it kind of easy for you to have that habit and routine, and everything set in place, and you don't have to overthink it.
I don't think that setting up this adjusting for getting a meal in at certain times of the day is necessarily that big of a deal personally. But I don't want people to like stress over it and make that as something that becomes a hindrance to their fitness journey. So that's why I stress.
Oh no, I'm just saying, like, for me, it's easy because I know that I'm going to get that food in, because I might be busy later and I'm probably not going to eat.
I find it super easy too. So for those of you that are struggling with it, you've got two coaches that now say it's super easy. Good luck.
It's easy. And I think I'm going to go back to really quickly before we let you off, because I said I'm going to make this about half hour, 30 minutes, but
I knew that was going to be a lie, by the way. When you said that, and I was like, no, it's not, but that's okay.
You did smile, but hey, I didn't really know what was behind it. But like you said, you really have to just go to the basics first. And I think that's your main mission, is you really want to empower people that it's not as complicated as everybody makes it out to be. And if it seems too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. And that's one of the big red flags too, is I love that you brought that up, that, the women are not small men kind of thing. Because I think it makes it almost like the message is so separate.
Well, you brought up a point that I think is very salient there. Earlier, you said, when we were talking about some of the charlatans, you said that when they say that message over and over and over and over again, do they begin to believe it? And I think that this is one of the times that that's true. Because I've seen the people that say women are not small men consistently misinterpret research, because they're trying to prove that point, because that's what their entire identity and their career is based on.
Okay.
And so every time they see data like cortisol or what estrogen is doing, they immediately make erroneous leaps to health outcomes based on that data, because they're trying to prove that you're different. They're not trying to look at the data objectively. They're trying to fill their coffers with more money by proving. Yes, they're not trying to get to the truth of the situation. They're trying to prove that women are different. If you go into knowledge with a preconceived notion that you're trying to prove, that's a problem. The people that are really good at giving information and that are reputable, they don't try to prove what they believe. They try to disprove what they believe. If
Mhm.
you're a person that is reputable, you try to disprove what you believe. You take the stance of the other people and you try to disprove it. When you cannot disprove it, that's a good first step in suggesting, okay, maybe my stance has some gravity to it. Now that
Yeah.
doesn't prove your stance, but that's the first thing that you should do, is try to prove yourself wrong. Because if you go into Google and you're searching for this, does the menstrual cycle make things worse, or should I train differently on the menstrual cycle, you're going to get all of the references that show you that you should train differently on the menstrual cycle, and you're
Oh,
going to
yeah.
miss you're going to get the 10% of references that say you should, and you're going to miss the 90% of references that say that those references are bullshit, and here's why.
Yeah.
And so that's the issue that a lot of these people run into.
So what about all these questions, all these conversations? What about like the cardio zones that everybody's freaking out about? Like zone 2 cardio, or we should do this so many times a week when talk about that for a second. And is there anything to that, the zones of cardio, and should we be worried about it?
You shouldn't be worried about it at all. They're not going to do anything negative to you.
Hmm.
Assuming that you're otherwise healthy, it doesn't matter. There's no zone of cardio that you should avoid post-menopause that you can do pre-menopause. It makes zero
Hmm.
difference. And the way that again, this is one of those,
But
they're
some
trying
people
to
will say,
find.
get in zone 2 cardio so you can get in a fat burning zone. When, I mean, for me, as a former bodybuilder, I don't really fall into that sometimes. But then I second guess myself sometimes when people keep saying it over and over, and I'm like, do I not know what I'm talking about?
Fat
You
burning,
know?
fat burning, and fat burning and fat loss are two different things. And
Hmm.
and this is where people get really confused about that. Lower intensity steady state cardio is good at fat burning,
Yeah.
whereas high intensity interval training is good at glucose burning. That doesn't mean that lower intensity steady state cardio leads to more fat loss, because weight loss itself is driven by energy balance, the calories in and out, equation.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so if you are burning more calories from fat, then you are potentially storing more calories from your dietary carbohydrates as body fat.
Hmm.
And so there's a difference in substrate utilization than in what's actually happening with fat loss. And that's where people really don't get it. And I understand that why they don't get it, because saying fat burning and fat loss are two different things is very confusing for most people.
Sure.
But your body is going to use exogenous stores and endogenous stores of energy. And if you're using your fat stores, then you're not using the carbs that you're eating. And so then once you've burned up those fat stores, then your body's going to shuttle those carbs right into those fat cells if you're not in a calorie deficit. And
Mm.
so people are getting this misconception that, oh, I have to do whatever zone. I mean, it is different, again, because this isn't actually a real thing. You
Yeah.
hear like different things depending on who's saying it. So I hate when I address this, because I'm like, they say don't do zone 2, but then someone else is like, but my person says don't do zone 5, and I'm like,
Yeah.
God damn it. And so it's a fun conversation to have, because it varies depending on which charlatan is saying what.
But that's a
But
great no, but that's a great point too that I wanted to bring up from the very beginning. I said, a red flag is us being a little bit confused about that information because it's not the same consistently across the board.
I think these
That's
charlatans are confused about it too. I don't think that they know what they're talking about. And
right.
so there is a reason to do certain zones of cardio
Mhm,
if you want to have certain adaptations, because
mhm.
specificity of training also comes into play. But again, this is personal preference. If you want to get really good at like endurance type work, you probably shouldn't be doing all high intensity interval training,
Yeah.
because that's not endurance work. And so you
Mhm.
might want to spend more time in like a zone 2 or something else.
Yeah.
And so if your goal is to be better at marathons, you're not going to be spending a lot of time in zone 5.
But this
That
is
doesn't
all beyond the basics though. That
Yeah,
that
and that also doesn't mean that the other zones are going to hurt you.
Yeah,
It just means your body's going to adapt to the stressors that you put on it.
sure.
And so if you want to get better at sprinting, you're going to spend more time in a higher zone,
Mhm.
because
Yep.
that's what you want to train.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the cortisol response from it, usually the issue that I hear with these people where they're like, you have to avoid this zone, is because they're worried about cortisol. And
Mhm.
and again, just because cortisol is higher from one zone versus another doesn't mean it's a negative adaptation. That's your body functioning as it should.
Yeah.
And so that's like saying, oh, you shouldn't eat any food, because if you eat food, your body releases insulin. That's what it does.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's functioning as intended. This is a feature, not a bug. And
Yeah.
so they're misconstruing two pieces of information. They're suggesting that, hey, look at these studies that show that super high cortisol for super long periods of time is problematic. Well, you don't have a problem with your hormones in general. Your body's functioning fine. And then they'll show you this. Well, cortisol's higher after this type of cardio. Well, yeah, I mean, it causes a higher cortisol release, but that cortisol is back down to like baselines at like 3 or 4 hours. That's not
Yeah.
chronic cortisol raise. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Like that's your body adapting to what you're putting it through.
Yeah.
And so it's really funny because there's a thing called a hormetic response, and that's your body adapting to low grade inflammation, low grade challenges, low grade stressors over time. That's how you get stronger, faster, better, healthier. Your body doesn't get healthy from not being challenged.
Right.
And so
Right.
we're telling people, don't challenge yourself. What? Like that's
It's a great
this
note.
is
I
this is
love
exactly
that.
how I improve.
Yes, that is a great
And
way
we're
to
like,
put
well,
that.
don't do that. Your body is so frail that you need to live in a bubble
Yeah.
because you can't be challenged by anything. And that's
Yeah.
essentially what the people that are saying you can't do this or you can't do this. Now we're constantly talking about menopause because that's the in thing right now. And that's
That's
why
why
we're
I said
talking.
it's hot. It's hot right now. It's
Yeah, I mean
full.
that's why we're talking about this so much. I mean,
Mhm.
this isn't solely about menopause, but like
Mhm.
that's what we're
Yeah.
hearing today.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about it a
Well,
lot because this is what people are being inundated with, and it's a susceptible population because you have women going through something that they've never gone through before. And logically, it might make sense that things are dramatically different because things feel dramatically different.
yeah.
And so it would make sense to look for solutions. And if somebody tells you there's a problem, even like in this situation where one doesn't exist, if they
Mhm.
tell you there's a problem, they can sell you a solution. And people will say, oh, they didn't sell me anything. I didn't buy a book from them. They sold you something. You paid
Yeah.
attention to their podcast. You paid attention to the blog article that they have. You watched their Instagram. You shared their
They
post. You
sold
liked
you
their
an
post.
idea.
You have been
Yes.
sold. You are giving
Mhm.
them money by liking their posts. You're giving them money by watching their podcasts. You just don't know that you've
Mhm.
been sold.
Yeah. So moving into 2025 with fitness and health in mind, what would be top top suggestions for everybody in regards to, of course, their goals, but really on who to filter through, who to follow, and what type of information to take seriously?
I mean, the the difficult thing with figuring out who to follow is exactly what I talked about earlier. You want to find somebody that tries to challenge their own beliefs, and I think that the best thing that you can possibly do if you're looking to find somebody that's credible, and I welcome this challenge. If anybody wants to send me something and say this person says that you have to train this way during menopause, I will drop you so much information showing that's not
Yeah.
true. So this is what I want people to do. If you have a question about somebody on whether or not they're credible,
Hmm.
send them a message or comment on their post that they're making a claim. Ask them to share the proof of why that's a thing.
Hmm.
And then ask them to explain, say, hey, look, Alan said your claim that cortisol does this is bullshit. Can you explain why he's wrong?
Yeah.
If you can explain why a person's wrong, you can show that you understand both sides of the equation. Now, be critical of the information that they give you, because again, in this example that we're giving, you can show somebody that cortisol is raised. Say, okay, that's great. Can you show me that it does what you're claiming it does? You're claiming that it creates a health problem, and that's why you recommend that we don't do it. You've shown me data that shows that the cortisol is raised. This doesn't show me that it creates a health problem. And then
Yeah.
you'll get silence because that doesn't exist. So
Yeah.
you need to be critical of the information that they're giving that is both supporting what they're saying, and then you need to have reassurance that they understand the other side of the equation. In
Yeah.
this example, I understand the other side of the equation. There is suggestion that cortisol is raised for certain types of cardio for an hour or 2 or 3 longer.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter. There's no health consequence to it whatsoever. They will give you information it's essentially kind of like a red herring. They're trying to draw your attention away from the real question. The real question is, do you have any proof that this is going to cause a problem? And the answer is no.
Hmm.
And so ask them to back up their proof, make sure it shows what they're showing, and they're not doing a sleight of hand like they're doing with the cortisol data. and
Mhm.
then ask them to explain the claims that the other person is showing. So in this instance, when the person says, you can't do this because of cortisol, you'll be like, okay, show me proof. And they'll show you the cortisol is higher. And you'll be like, okay, cool. This guy says that doesn't matter. Can you show me proof that it does matter? Crickets.
It's about the questions you ask, right? How you ask
Right.
them.
And so you have to listen to what they're saying and then ask for proof about what they're saying,
Yeah.
not necessarily the proof that they want to give you.
Yeah.
And so
The cool thing
it's a difficult situation to navigate because you almost have to have an understanding of research and what is being suggested itself.
The really cool thing, though, I think about social media is that we can control a lot of what we see and don't see just by what we're watching, what we're clicking on, like you said, the likes and or the shares or what have you. I just told you before we started that anybody that knows me knows part of my puppy story, knows I love dogs, and I for the past I don't know year, my Instagram feed is just filled with puppies and dogs, and it's beautiful. And I don't really have to worry about a lot of the information that I was seeing and getting so frustrated with because I just started clicking on things that I loved.
Yeah.
So I think that's the one great thing about social media is that we can really filter really quickly what we get to see.
Well,
But if you're
you need to be conscious as a consumer of information that this works two ways.
Mhm,
Because when we put out information, like I did a post about dairy this morning, and I knew that
mhm,
it wasn't going to be super popular because nobody cares about milk, but it was full of really good information and it was combating misinformation.
yeah,
If you value that
that's
creator
why we
and you
love
value,
you.
well, if you
Mhm,
value proper information, hit like
mhm,
immediately, like automatically,
yes,
because what that's going to do is that's going to allow more people to see good information and it's
mhm,
going to train the algorithm, even if you don't care about that dairy post,
mhm,
it's going to train the algorithm to show you more reputable
yeah.
accounts like mine.
I
And
think that
so
I talked
people,
to you about that early on, and you were one person that really helped me understand some of that algorithm within the social media space. Oh gosh, this was maybe a year or more ago. And a little conversation that I asked you something about, and then you said, "Well, if you see the post you like, just like it, and it'll start to bring it up more." And I'm like, "Oh, it's just
yeah.
all a learning process for all of us." That was a while, a long time
Well,
ago, but
I think that people don't realize that with a lot of the charlatan accounts because like somebody will say something that's so absolutely batshit crazy and they won't like it, but they'll comment on it. But commenting on it does
yes,
the exact same thing for the algorithm. Like if you go, ha ha ha, this is stupid, that
hmm
does the exact same thing for the algorithm as you liking and sharing and saving the post. And so it'll be like, oh, this person actually liked what this guy said because it doesn't read what you say, it just logs that you said
sure,
something. And
hmm
so it'll show you more and more and more nonsense. And
yeah,
so before long, you realize, oh, I wasn't hitting like on the person that said that I should eat a nutritious diet and sleep more. I was hitting like on, the inflammatory posts, or I was commenting on the inflammatory posts and laughing and I shared it because I thought it was really funny how dumb it was or whatever it is.
yeah,
But that person then has the support of all the people that believe them and then has the support of all the people that don't believe them.
yeah.
Whereas, if
Makes
you
sense.
make a post and you're like, hey, like you need to sleep 8 hours a night.
Yeah,
And everyone's like, that's boring. And they move on. Then,
right. Or they're
the
like, "I
good,
already know that," and they'll just swipe up.
right. The
Yeah.
good content doesn't get pushed to them. So it's beneficial for both the creators that put out good content and for them.
Yes.
And I think that people don't realize that essentially viewing a post and then not interacting with it, like not hitting a like, not commenting, it lowers the reach of that post.
Mhm. Yeah, you
And so
really
if
wanna
you've got a
people
creator
do
that you
that.
care about, the worst thing that you can do is take a look at one of their things and then kind of like scroll off real quickly and be like, oh, yeah, I agree with that. And then like scroll off real quickly without interacting with it. You
Mhm.
essentially hurt that person's reach.
And a like is so easy. It just
It
takes
costs nothing.
nothing, and it takes 2 seconds.
And it makes creators not cry
Yeah.
after the cameras are off. And so I bring this up because I don't think that people realize that it works this way. And so
No.
it's a really bad way to set up social media, but it's the way that's set up.
Yeah, and I mean, I even had to educate the people that I love on that as well. Like even my husband just isn't into social media. He just doesn't like it. He uses it for his business, but if it wasn't for that, he would not even be on.
I wouldn't
Um,
either.
And I had to tell him, "Hey, just like my post, just like my stuff, just comment a heart or something. It
Yeah.
will help me." And then, and it's real simple. And he just didn't know. He's like, "Oh, I had no idea."
Yeah, it doesn't
Because
matter
he's
what you
not on there
comment.
scrolling. Yeah.
Like if
Mhm.
you see like my post and you want to write "fuck you, Alan," that's fine. Makes no difference to me.
Like, thanks.
So, good, cool. And so like it does the same thing. And so this is where I don't think that people really realize it, because they'll make comments like that. Like, and you see this a lot in the political atmosphere that we have these days. Like you'll see somebody like push something that the other candidate said, and you're like, this is stupid. I hate this. Anybody that believes this, blah, blah, blah. But you're actually supporting that post.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
By
probably
giving
why
it
you keep seeing
attention.
more and more and more of them.
Yeah. Kind
You
of
know,
like,
and
kids in school when you give them attention when they're being bad.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. And
Or you're ignoring
unfortunately,
your dog. You ignore your dog when they're doing something they're not supposed to. That's if you give them attention, then they're going to do it more.
you support it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly how social media works. The social media algorithm is a child that is not acting right.
Yeah. Very good point.
And so
Well,
it's just funny nuance to be able to talk about, but at least if people are aware of it, you can find the creators that you like, support them, and
it's
ultimately
very
it ends up being
easy.
to your benefit, not only because it gives you a better feed,
Yeah.
but it motivates that person to create more quality content.
And part of stress management, I think, for a lot of people now, and what you and I never had to deal with when we were first in fitness, because social media wasn't a thing, is really just spending a less time consuming, and just limit your time. I feel like that's a good stress management, is to limit your social media time and
Yeah.
really just pay attention to the things like you said that you love, and get in, get out, and then live your life, your healthy
Yeah.
life, full
Well,
of big.
that's another thing. If you're liking the content from good people, you see that first, and then you can get off.
That's right. Get out of there, in and out. Set a
Yeah.
timer, because we all can get sucked in sometimes. Well, Dr. Allen, as you have written on your little pink name badge down there.
Oh, is that what I have?
um,
Yeah, nice.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure I could talk to you for an hour longer. I'll have to have you come back on maybe in a few months and hit some of the other points that we missed. So,
Sure.
um,
Sounds good. Thank you for
yeah,
having me on, Pam. I appreciate it.
yeah, so I'll just kind of go ahead and plug everywhere that you're at. Are you on YouTube at all? I know you're on Instagram, and then you
I
have a
am on YouTube.
website. You're on
You can
YouTube?
go to mauiathletics.com to look at my website. I got a huge science-based blog with a lot of very, very
Great.
helpful links. At the bottom of the page in the footer, you can see my links to social media, including YouTube and Instagram. And if you have any questions that you want to go over, if you want some proof for what I've said today, certainly send me a
Mhm.
DM on Instagram. I've got no problem providing that.
Yeah, and you have a large free Facebook group,
Mhm.
right? That, I joined,
Yeah,
and
I don't always push that one because it's a little bit more there's a lot of jokes in there, and so for people that
sure.
are
Well,
sensitive.
I think it's fun in there. If you have, questions, and I know you opened that up sometimes for like forum videos
Oh
and,
yeah.
and things like that. So you're kind of all over the place trying to reach, as many good people that you can. So we truly appreciate you. And thank you so much for all of this time, and coming on. So I'll plug
Yeah.
everything for you and put it all in the show notes and all that stuff, and go give him a follow.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.